The judge's gavel froze midair, his face draining of color as I walked through those courtroom doors. That was the moment everything changed. I'm Anna Vance, and for 28 years, I was invisible in my own family. Not literally invisible, of course, but the kind of invisible that cuts deeper than any knife. The kind where your mother walks past you at charity galas to embrace your brother. The kind where your father introduces everyone at dinner parties except you. The kind where you're expected to smile through it all because that's what good daughters do. My father, Edward Vance, built his empire in commercial real estate, turning abandoned warehouses into luxury condominiums that dotted the Chicago skyline. My mother, Victoria, perfected the art of being a socialite wife, her calendar filled with benefit luncheons and country club tournaments. And then there was Blake, my older brother by 3 years, golden child extraordinaire, who could do no wrong even when he did everything wrong. Me, I was the mistake. The daughter they never quite figured out what to do with, the one who didn't fit the mold they'd carefully crafted for their perfect family image. I remember the night of the Hastings Foundation Gala, 3 months before Grandpa Sampson died. I was 27, had just finished my MBA, and thought maybe, just maybe, this would be my moment to prove myself. I'd spent weeks preparing a proposal for one of Dad's stalled development projects, finding creative solutions to zoning issues that had plagued it for months. I was so naive. The ballroom glittered with Chicago's elite, crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light across designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. I spotted my parents near the bar, surrounded by business associates. My father's booming laugh carried across the room. I smoothed down my dress, one I'd bought specifically for this occasion, and approached with my portfolio tucked under my arm. "Dad, I wanted to show you something about the Riverside project," I began, trying to inject confidence into my voice. He barely glanced at me. "Anna, not now. Can't you see I'm in the middle of something?" "It'll just take a minute. I found a way to get around the zoning restrictions by—" I said, "Not now." His voice was sharp, final. He turned back to his conversation as if I'd ceased to exist. Blake appeared at his elbow, immaculate in his Armani suit. "What Anna's trying to say, Dad, is that I've been working on a new approach to Riverside." He didn't even look at me as he stole my ideas, presenting them as his own. My father's eyes lit up, that proud gleam I'd spent my whole life chasing appearing instantly for my brother. "Now that's initiative, son. Let's discuss this Monday." I stood there, invisible again, clutching my portfolio. My mother materialized beside me, her grip on my elbow surprisingly firm. "Don't make a scene, Anna. You're embarrassing yourself." She guided me away from the group, her smile never wavering for the benefit of onlookers. "Why must you always try so hard? You're not built for this world. Blake is. Accept your place." My place. Like I was a piece of furniture to be positioned and forgotten. But Grandpa Sampson saw me. He was the only one who ever did. While my parents and Blake networked, I spent evenings in his study, the only room in the Vance mansion that felt like home. The walls were lined with leather-bound books, and it always smelled of pipe tobacco and old paper. Grandpa Sampson, the patriarch who'd built the Vance fortune from nothing, would listen to my ideas about business, about architecture, about everything. He'd nod thoughtfully, ask questions that made me think deeper, challenge me in ways that made me better. "You've got your grandmother's mind, Anna," he'd say, tapping his temple. "Sharp as a tack and twice as useful. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." 3 weeks before he died, we sat in that study one last time. He was frailer then, the cancer eating away at him, but his eyes were still sharp. He held my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "I've made provisions, Anna, for you. Don't let them take what's rightfully yours. You're the only one who truly understands what I built and why." His words were cryptic then. I wish I'd understood sooner. When Grandpa Sampson passed, the family's grief was performative at best. Blake was already calculating his inheritance. My parents were concerned with how his death would affect their social standing. I was the only one who actually mourned him, who felt the genuine loss of the one person who'd seen me as more than an inconvenience. The will reading was held in the mahogany-paneled conference room of Whitmore and Associates, the law firm that had served my family for 3 decades. Richard Whitmore himself presided, a portly man with silver hair and an obsequious smile that I'd always found unsettling. My family arranged themselves like royalty awaiting coronation. Blake sat forward, eager. My parents maintained their composed masks. I sat at the far end of the table, where I always Saturday apart. Whitmore cleared his throat dramatically. "The last will and testament of Sampson, Edward Vance." He proceeded to read through the standard legal jargon before getting to the meat of it. "To my son, Edward Vance, I leave my personal effects and the sum of $500,000. To my grandson, Blake Vance, I leave my collection of vintage automobiles and the sum of $1 million. Blake's smile was triumphant. This was exactly what he expected. This was his birthright. The remainder of my estate, including all real estate holdings, business interests, investment portfolios, and associated assets, estimated at approximately $42 million, I leave to Blake Edward Vance, to be held in trust until his 30th birthday. The room erupted in celebration. Blake actually whooped. My mother pressed her hand to her chest in proud relief. My father's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Their perfect son was receiving his perfect inheritance. And me? Nothing. Not even a mention. Not even one of Grandpa's books or his old pipe. I was erased from his legacy as thoroughly as I'd been erased from everything else. I sat there, numbness spreading through my chest. I told myself it didn't matter, that I never expected anything anyway. That hoping for recognition from my family, living or dead, was foolish. But it hurt. God, it hurt in a way I couldn't articulate. "Well, Anna," my mother said as we filed out of the conference room, "I suppose you'll need to start thinking seriously about your future now. Perhaps it's time to consider marriage." The Henderson's son, Timothy, is still single. She wanted to marry me off, to get rid of the problem child permanently. I went home to my tiny studio apartment in Wicker Park, the one I could barely afford on my salary from the marketing firm where I worked. It was cramped, and the heating was unreliable, but it was mine. Away from them. I poured myself a glass of cheap wine and tried not to feel sorry for myself. I failed miserably, but I couldn't shake Grandpa's last words to me. "Don't let them take what's rightfully yours." What did that mean? He'd left me nothing. Unless... The thought was absurd, paranoid, but it burrowed into my brain and wouldn't let go. My family was capable of cruelty, yes, but fraud? Forgery? That seemed extreme even for them. Yet I couldn't stop thinking about it. Over the next 2 weeks I became obsessed. I started researching will contests, forgery detection, inheritance fraud. I spent my lunch breaks in the Harold Washington Library, buried in legal texts. At night, I'd lie awake, replaying that will reading in my mind, analyzing every detail. Something was wrong. I could feel it. The old Vance family warehouse sat on the edge of the industrial district, a relic from Grandpa's early days in business. It had been scheduled for demolition for years, but somehow kept getting delayed. My parents never went there. They considered it beneath them, a reminder of humble origins they'd rather forget. I broke in on a Saturday morning. Well, broke in is generous. The side door's lock was so rusted I barely had to jiggle it. Inside, the warehouse was a cathedral of dust and shadows, weak sunlight streaming through grimy windows. Old furniture sat under tarps, boxes stacked haphazardly, the accumulated debris of decades. I spent hours searching. I didn't even know what I was looking for. Some sign, some proof, some reason to believe that Grandpa had meant those words to me. The basement was almost an afterthought. I'd nearly given up when I noticed the door behind a stack of rotting crates. The stairs creaked ominously as I descended into darkness, my phone's flashlight barely cutting through the gloom. The basement was small, more of a cellar really, with stone walls weeping moisture and the smell of earth and decay. In the corner, behind more boxes, I found an old filing cabinet. Most drawers were empty or filled with meaningless paperwork from decades ago, but the bottom drawer stuck when I tried to open it. I yanked harder, and it finally gave way. Inside was a metal document box. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were papers, old photographs, and an envelope marked Last Will and Testament of Sampson, Edward Vance, executed June 15th, 2023. The date made my breath catch. The will that Whitmore had read was dated June 20th, 2023, 5 days later. But Grandpa had been in hospice by then, barely conscious. I opened the document with trembling fingers. The language was formal, legal, but the meaning was crystal clear. Everything, the entire estate, was left to me, Anna Marie Vance. Not Blake, me. There was a letter too, in Grandpa's distinctive handwriting. I had to sit down on the dirty floor to read it, tears blurring my vision. "My dearest Anna, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I suspect that my son has done something I hoped he wouldn't. I've watched Edward raise Blake to be just like him, greedy and entitled, caring only for appearances and money. But you, Anna, you have your grandmother's heart. You care about building things that matter, about treating people with dignity. You're the only one worthy of carrying on what I've built. I know your father will try to take this from you. He's always resented that I see through him, that I know what he really is. But you're stronger than you know. Fight for what's yours. Fight for what's right. You deserve so much more than they've ever given you. With all my love, Grandpa." I sat in that basement and cried. Not sad tears, but angry ones. Furious ones. They'd stolen from me. My own family had forged a will, had committed fraud, had erased me from Grandpa's legacy just as they'd tried to erase me from everything else. But I had proof. And this time, I wasn't going to be invisible. Over the next 6 months, I became someone I didn't recognize. The meek, overlooked daughter died in that basement. Someone harder, sharper, more determined took her place. I threw myself into research with a single-minded intensity that bordered on obsession. Every free moment was dedicated to building my case. I enrolled in night classes at Northwestern's law school, sitting in on lectures about estate law, contract law, fraud detection. I befriended a forensic documents examiner named Dr. Lisa Chen, who taught a seminar on forgery detection. She was brilliant, methodical, and when I showed her both wills, her eyes widened. "This is textbook forgery," she said, pointing to the signature on the later will. "See how the pressure is inconsistent? That's from tracing. And look at these hesitation marks. Your grandfather had Parkinson's, correct? His genuine signature would show tremor patterns. This one's too smooth. Someone tried to steady it artificially." I had her prepare a full forensic analysis. It cost me 3 months of salary. I didn't care. Next, I contacted a private investigator named Marcus Alvarez, a former FBI agent who'd gone private. He was expensive, thorough, and completely unimpressed by my family's name. I liked him immediately. "I need you to dig into my father's finances," I told him in his cluttered office in the Loop. "Find anything irregular, anything that connects him to will forgery or fraud." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying me. "You understand what you're asking? If I find something, there's no putting that genie back in the bottle. Your family could face criminal charges." "Good." He smiled then, a sharp, predatory thing. "I'll see what I can find." What he found was explosive. Edward Vance wasn't the legitimate businessman he portrayed. Marcus uncovered shell companies, offshore accounts, real estate deals that were little more than money laundering schemes. My father had been skimming from Grandpa's business for years, hiding money that should have been part of the estate. Blake was involved too, using dummy corporations to funnel money from the inheritance before it was even officially his. But the smoking gun was a paper trail, connecting Edward to a disbarred lawyer named Gerald Hutchins. 3 days before Grandpa died, Edward had written Hutchins a check for $50,000. Marcus found emails, carefully encrypted but not carefully enough, discussing document preparation and signature samples. They'd planned this. They'd known Grandpa's real will left everything to me and they'd stolen it. I needed a lawyer, someone who couldn't be bought or intimidated by my family's connections. I found him in James Miller, a crusty 70-year-old attorney who'd been one of Grandpa's oldest friends. He'd retired from active practice but still kept his license active. When I showed up at his brownstone in Lincoln Park with my evidence, he invited me in for tea. "Samson talked about you often," he said, pouring Earl Grey into delicate china cups. He was worried about what would happen after he passed. I told him to be more explicit in his estate planning, to protect you better, but he was always too optimistic about people's better nature. "I need your help, Mr. Miller. I need to take them to court." He was quiet for a long moment, studying the documents I'd laid out on his coffee table. Finally, he looked up at me, his eyes sharp despite his age. "This will destroy your family, Anna. Your father and brother could go to prison. Your mother's reputation will be ruined. Are you prepared for that?" I thought of every dismissive comment, every stolen idea, every moment I'd been made to feel worthless. I thought of Grandpa's letter, his faith in me. "Yes." "Then let's make them pay." We filed the lawsuit on a Monday morning in March. The complaint was thorough, devastating. Will contest, fraud, forgery, conspiracy, breach of fiduciary duty. We included criminal referrals to the Cook County State's attorney. We held nothing back. The response was immediate and explosive. By that afternoon, my phone was flooded with missed calls from my parents, from Blake, from family friends and distant relatives. I blocked them all except one. I wanted to hear what my mother had to say. "How dare you?" Victoria's voice was shaking with rage when I finally answered. "How dare you drag our family through the mud like this? You ungrateful little bitch. After everything we've done for you." "Everything you've done? Like stealing my inheritance? Like forging Grandpa's will? You were never supposed to have anything. You're nothing, Anna. You've always been nothing." Samson was losing his mind at the end. "That will you found was from when he was delusional. The real will, the one that matters, leaves everything to Blake because Blake is the one who deserves it. Then you'll have no problem proving that in court." She screamed at me then, a wordless sound of fury, before the line went dead. My father's approach was more direct. He showed up at my office 2 days after we filed. Security tried to stop him, but Edward Vance had a way of bulldozing through obstacles. He cornered me in the lobby, his face red with anger. "You're making a mistake, Anna. A very serious mistake. Withdraw the lawsuit, apologize, and maybe, I'll convince Blake to give you something. 100,000. Enough to be comfortable. I don't want Blake's charity. I want what Grandpa left me." His hand shot out, gripping my arm hard enough to bruise. "You're going to regret this. I've spent 40 years building this family's reputation. I will not let some delusional girl tear it down because she's jealous of her brother's success. Let go of me, or I'll add assault to the complaint." He released me, but his eyes were cold. "You have no idea what you've started." But I did. I knew exactly what I'd started. War. The legal maneuvering was brutal. My family hired Thornton and Beck, one of Chicago's most prestigious and ruthless law firms. They filed motion after motion trying to get the case dismissed, trying to suppress evidence, trying to delay. But we were ready for every move. Marcus kept digging, finding more evidence of financial impropriety. Dr. Chen's forensic analysis was ironclad. And James Miller, for all his grandfatherly demeanor, was a courtroom shark. Meanwhile, my family's perfect facade began to crack. Marcus had leaked just enough information to the press to generate interest. Stories started appearing in the Chicago Tribune and Sun-Times. Vance family faces will fraud allegations. Real estate mogul accused of forging father's will. The society pages, once filled with glowing coverage of Vance family charity events, now buzzed with gossip and scandal. Their friends began to distance themselves. Business partners started asking questions. The country club was suddenly less welcoming. Everything my parents had built their lives around, the social status they'd prized above all else, started crumbling. Blake, predictably, fell apart. He'd built his entire identity on being the golden boy, the chosen heir. Now that identity was under assault. Marcus found evidence that Blake had been using estate money to fund a lavish lifestyle, six-figure gambling debts at underground poker games, a secret apartment where he kept his mistress. When that information became public, his engagement to Jennifer Hastings, daughter of another prominent Chicago family, ended spectacularly. She called off the wedding via Instagram post, citing discovering the real Blake. The frozen asset orders came next. The court, agreeing that there was substantial evidence of fraud, froze the estate and several of my father's accounts pending the outcome of the trial. Suddenly, the Vance family lifestyle was unsustainable. The vacation home in Aspen went on the market. The boat was sold, staff were let go. My parents had to actually budget for the first time in decades. I watched it all with grim satisfaction. Every article, every setback, every public humiliation was a small payment on the debt they owed me. Then came an unexpected ally. Sarah Jenkins was an investigative journalist for Chicago Magazine, known for her exposés on corruption and white-collar crime. She'd been following the case from the beginning and reached out to me through James Miller. We met at a coffee shop in Andersonville, neutral territory. Sarah was younger than I expected, maybe 35, with sharp eyes behind red-framed glasses and a recording device she placed on the table between us. "I want to tell your story," she said. "The real story. Not the sensational headlines about rich families fighting over money, but what this is really about. Abuse, erasure, a woman fighting to be seen." I was wary at first, but as we talked, I realized Sarah understood. She'd grown up with a narcissistic mother, had her own experiences with family toxicity. She wasn't looking for a quick story. She wanted to expose something important. "I'll need access," she said. "Court documents, interviews with you and your legal team. I want to sit in the courtroom when this goes to trial. And in exchange? I'll tell the truth, the whole truth, not just about the forgery, but about what they did to you, how they treated you your whole life. Let the public see them for what they really are." I agreed, and Sarah's articles became a crucial part of the battle. She wrote with empathy and precision, painting a picture of a family that valued appearances over people, money over morality. Her pieces went viral, shared across social media, discussed on morning talk shows. The court of public opinion was firmly on my side. The criminal investigation began 3 months before trial. Cook County State's Attorney Melissa Rodriguez was ambitious, talented, and very interested in prosecuting a high-profile forgery case. Marcus's evidence, combined with Dr. Chen's forensic analysis and the testimony of Gerald Hutchins, who'd agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence, was overwhelming. Blake was arrested first. A humiliating perp walk covered by every news outlet in Chicago. The charges included fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. He spent one night in jail before posting bail, but the damage was done. Blake Vance, once the pride of Chicago's elite, was now just another criminal defendant. The civil trial was scheduled for October, in the same courthouse where Grandpa's probate case had been filed. Judge Patricia Morrison, a no-nonsense jurist with a reputation for fairness and intolerance for bullshit, would preside. She'd reviewed the evidence during preliminary hearings and hadn't bothered hiding her skepticism of my family's position. The days leading up to trial were a blur. James and I prepared constantly, rehearsing testimony, anticipating their defenses. I barely slept. I barely ate. Everything I'd worked for, everything Grandpa had wanted for me, came down to this. The morning of the trial, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, straightening my navy suit, the most professional outfit I owned. I looked different than I had a year ago. Thinner, harder, older. The invisible girl was gone. In her place was someone who'd learned to fight. My phone buzzed. A text from James. "Courthouse is packed. Media circus. Are you ready?" I typed back, "Yes." The Richard J. Daley Center was a modernist fortress of steel and glass, home to the Cook County Circuit Court. The plaza outside was filled with news vans and reporters. I arrived through a side entrance, trying to avoid the cameras, but they found me anyway. Questions were shouted, microphones thrust in my face. James guided me through, his hand on my elbow, saying, "No comment," repeatedly until we were inside. The courtroom was on the 14th floor, a large, formal space with wood paneling and high ceilings. The gallery was full beyond capacity, people standing in the back. I recognized some faces, society gossips who'd ignored me my entire life, now desperate to witness the Vance family's downfall. Sarah Jenkins sat in the press section, her laptop open, ready to document everything. And then there was my family. Edward sat at the defense table, his jaw clenched, eyes forward. Victoria beside him, her face carefully composed but her hands trembling slightly. Blake sat apart from them, his own legal team surrounding him. When I walked in, their heads turned. The looks they gave me were beyond hatred. They looked at me like I was a traitor, a monster, something inhuman that had infiltrated their perfect family. Good. Let them see me. Really see me. For the first time in their lives. I took my seat at the plaintiff's table. James patted my hand. "Remember, we have the truth on our side. That's more powerful than anything they can throw at us." Judge Morrison entered, and we all rose. She was a black woman in her late 50s, her hair pulled back severely, her expression radiating authority. "Be seated," she commanded, and everyone obeyed instantly. "We're here today in the matter of Vance v. Vance, a will contest with associated fraud claims. This court has reviewed the preliminary evidence and finds sufficient cause for trial. We'll proceed with opening statements." James stood, buttoning his jacket. He was old-fashioned, eschewing PowerPoint for simple, direct oratory. "Your Honor, this case is about theft, not the theft of money, though that's certainly part of it. This is about the theft of legacy, of love, of a grandfather's final wish to care for the grandchild who actually cared for him. The evidence will show that the defendants, driven by greed and a disturbing pattern of family favoritism, forged a will to disinherit my client. We will present forensic evidence, financial records, and testimony that proves, beyond any doubt, that Anna Vance is the rightful heir to Samson Vance's estate, and that her family committed serious crimes to steal it from her." The defense attorney, Marcus Thornton himself, a silver-haired titan of Chicago law, stood next. His voice was smooth, condescending. "What we have here, Your Honor, is a bitter young woman who cannot accept that her grandfather chose to leave his estate to his grandson, as is traditional in many families. The will executed 5 days before Mr. Samson Vance's death was properly witnessed, properly filed, and represents his true final wishes. The so-called original will that Miss Vance mysteriously found in an abandoned warehouse is convenient, suspect, and likely a forgery itself. We will demonstrate that there is no credible evidence of fraud, and that this lawsuit is nothing more than a vindictive attempt to destroy a family out of jealousy." The battle lines were drawn. We started with Dr. Chen. James walked her through her credentials, then the forensic analysis. She was clear, precise, damning. "The signature on the will dated June 20th exhibits all the classic signs of forgery," she testified, pointing to blown-up images of the signatures. "Tremor simulation, where the forger tries to mimic the shakiness of Parkinson's disease but does so irregularly. Hesitation marks from tracing. Pen lifts in places where a natural signature would be continuous. The signature on the June 15th will, however, shows genuine tremor patterns consistent with Mr. Vance's medical condition. That's the real signature." Thornton tried to discredit her on cross-examination, suggesting she was biased, that forensic document examination wasn't an exact science. But Dr. Chen was unshakable. She'd testified in hundreds of cases. Her credentials were impeccable. The jury, I could see, believed her. Marcus Alvarez came next, walking through the financial investigation. He presented evidence of the shell companies, the offshore accounts, the money laundering. He showed the $50,000 payment to Gerald Hutchins, the incriminating emails. Each piece of evidence was another nail in my family's coffin. "In my 25 years investigating financial crimes," Marcus testified, "I've never seen a cleaner pattern of fraud. Edward Vance knew his father's real will disinherited his son, so he took steps to create a new one, using a disbarred lawyer and forged documents. The digital trail is undeniable." Thornton tried to create doubt, suggesting Marcus had interpreted the evidence to fit a narrative, that legitimate business dealings were being portrayed as sinister. But the paper trail was too solid. Even Thornton seemed to realize he was fighting a losing battle. Then came Gerald Hutchins, the disbarred lawyer, testifying under immunity. He was a small man, balding, defeated. He wouldn't look at Edward as he spoke. "Edward Vance contacted me in early June," Hutchins said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He told me his father was dying and planned to leave everything to his daughter. He said this was unacceptable, that Blake was the rightful heir. He paid me $50,000 to create a new will and forge Samson's signature. He provided me with signature samples, medical records, everything I needed. I knew it was wrong. I did it anyway. I needed the money." The courtroom was silent. Even the reporters had stopped typing. This was the confession, the smoking gun, delivered in person. My turn came on the third day. I walked to the witness stand, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. I placed my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Then I sat and looked out at the courtroom. At James, encouraging. At Sarah, documenting. At my family, radiating hate. "Miss Vance," James began gently, "can you tell us about your relationship with your grandfather?" And I did. I told them everything. Growing up invisible, dismissed by parents who only valued my brother. Grandpa Sampson's study, the only place I felt valued. His encouragement, his faith in me. The nights we'd talk about business, about life, about building something meaningful. I told them about the Hastings Gala, about Blake stealing my ideas, about my mother telling me to accept my place. I told them about the will reading, the shock of being entirely erased. "What did you feel when you heard that your grandfather had left you nothing?" James asked. At first, just numbness. Then pain. Not because I cared about the money, but because I thought it meant Grandpa hadn't seen me either. That even he, the one person I thought understood me, had decided I wasn't worth remembering. My voice cracked. I didn't try to hide it, but then I remembered his last words to me. "Don't let them take what's rightfully yours." And I knew something was wrong. I told them about finding the will, about the letter. James had me read it aloud to the court. My voice shook as I read Grandpa's words, his love, his faith in me. When I finished, several people in the gallery were crying. Even Judge Morrison's expression had softened. Thornton's cross-examination was brutal. He tried to paint me as a jealous sister, a vindictive daughter making up stories to steal from my brother. He questioned my motives, my timing, my every action. "Isn't it true, Miss Vance, that you've always resented Blake's success?" He demanded. "No, I resented being treated as if I didn't exist." "But you admit you were jealous of the attention your brother received?" "I was hurt that my parents showed him love and showed me nothing. That's not jealousy, that's a normal human response to parental neglect." "Neglect? Your parents provided you with food, shelter, education. How is that neglect?" I looked directly at my mother then. She couldn't hold my gaze. "Neglect isn't just about material things, Mr. Thornton. It's about emotional abandonment. It's about being made to feel worthless in your own home. It's about parents who couldn't be bothered to learn who you actually were because they were too busy worshiping your brother." He tried to rattle me, but I was done being rattled. I was done being invisible. I answered every question with calm precision, never losing my composure, never backing down. Blake testified next, for the defense. It was a disaster for them. He was arrogant, entitled, unable to hide his disdain for me or the proceedings. When asked why he thought Grandpa had left him everything, he said, "Because I'm the one who could handle it." The responsibility of the Vance legacy requires someone strong, someone who understands business, not someone like Anna. "What do you mean, someone like Anna?" James asked on cross-examination. Blake sneered. "Someone who's spent her whole life being mediocre. Someone who needed my grandfather's pity to feel special." The truth is, Anna never measured up. She still doesn't. It was exactly the testimony we needed. Blake's contempt for me was clear. His sense of entitlement was obvious. The jury's expressions ranged from disgust to outrage. Edward was barely better. He was more controlled, but his disdain for the proceedings leaked through. He denied everything, called the forensic evidence junk science, dismissed Marcus's investigation as biased. But when James showed him the check to Gerald Hutchins, he faltered. "Can you explain this $50,000 payment?" James asked. "It was for business consulting." "What kind of business consulting?" "Estate planning advice." "From a disbarred lawyer? Why would you need estate planning advice from someone who couldn't legally practice law?" Edward had no good answer. He blustered, deflected, but the jury saw through it. Victoria didn't testify. Her lawyers wisely kept her off the stand, knowing she'd be torn apart. But her presence in the courtroom, her carefully maintained composure cracking as the evidence piled up, was testimony enough. The defense rested after a week. Their case was thin, relying mostly on attacks on my character and attempts to discredit our expert witnesses. They had no real evidence supporting the validity of the June 20th will because there was none. It was a forgery, and everyone in that courtroom knew it. Closing arguments came on a Friday. James was brief, powerful. "The evidence is clear. Anna Vance was robbed of her inheritance by family members who valued money over love, status over integrity. Sampson Vance knew his son and grandson for who they really were. That's why he left everything to Anna. That's why they had to forge a new will. The forensic evidence is undeniable. The financial trail is clear. The confession from their co-conspirator is definitive. This isn't a family dispute. This is a crime, and justice demands that Anna Vance receive what her grandfather intended for her." Thornton gave it his best effort, arguing reasonable doubt, questioning motivations, suggesting we'd manufactured evidence to support a false narrative. But even he seemed to know it was over. His voice lacked conviction. His arguments felt hollow. Judge Morrison took less than an hour to render her decision. In probate court, there was no jury, just her judgment. We all rose as she returned to the bench, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was it. Everything came down to this moment. I've presided over many estate disputes in my 30 years on the bench. Judge Morrison began, her voice echoing in the silent courtroom. I've seen families torn apart by greed, by misunderstanding, by poor planning. But I have never, in all my years, seen anything quite like this case. She paused, looking directly at my father. Edward's face was pale, his jaw clenched. The evidence presented by the plaintiff is not just compelling, it is overwhelming. The forensic analysis of the signatures is conclusive. The financial investigation reveals a clear pattern of fraud and conspiracy. And the testimony of Gerald Hutchins, corroborated by documentary evidence, leaves no room for doubt. The will dated June 20th, 2023, is a forgery. The will, dated June 15, 2023, found by Anna Vance and authenticated by multiple experts, is the true and valid last will and testament of Samson Edward Vance. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Victoria made a sound like a wounded animal. Blake's face went from red to white. Edward just stared straight ahead, his world collapsing around him. Therefore, this court rules that the entire estate of Samson Edward Vance, in its entirety, passes to Anna Marie Vance as the sole beneficiary. All assets currently held by Blake Edward Vance that derive from the fraudulent will must be returned immediately. Furthermore, due to the egregious nature of the fraud perpetrated, this court is awarding Anna Vance additional compensatory damages of $2 million for emotional distress and punitive damages of $5 million, to be paid jointly by Edward Vance, Victoria Vance, and Blake Vance. The gavel came down with a crack that felt like thunder. Additionally, Judge Morrison continued, her expression stern, I am referring this matter to the Cook County State's Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution. The evidence of forgery, fraud, and conspiracy is clear. The defendants should expect criminal charges to be filed. Another crack of the gavel. This court is adjourned. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled for their phones. People in the gallery talked excitedly. Sarah Jenkins was typing furiously, already filing her story. James squeezed my shoulder, his eyes wet with tears of victory. I just sat there, numb with shock. I'd won. After everything. After years of being invisible, after months of fighting, I'd won. I turned to look at my family. Edward sat frozen, his face ashen. This was a man who'd controlled everything his entire life, and now he had nothing. Victoria was crying, loud, ugly sobs, her carefully maintained facade shattered completely. Blake had his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. They'd gambled everything on their superiority, on their certainty that I was too weak to fight back. They'd lost spectacularly. Security had to clear a path for me to leave the courtroom. Reporters shouted questions. How do you feel, Miss Vance? What will you do with the money? Do you have anything to say to your family? I ignored them all, James guiding me toward a private exit. But then I heard my father's voice. Anna, wait. I stopped. James tried to pull me forward, but I turned around. Edward had broken free from his lawyers and was pushing through the crowd toward me. Security moved to intercept him, but I held up a hand. I wanted to hear this. I needed to hear this. He stopped a few feet away, close enough to talk without shouting. Up close, he looked old, defeated. The powerful Edward Vance was gone, replaced by a scared man facing prison. Please, he said, his voice breaking. Please. We can work this out. I can explain. Your mother and I, we only did what we thought was best. Blake needs that money for his future. You're young, you can build your own life. But Blake, he's built everything around this inheritance. Please, don't destroy your family over this. I stared at him, this man who'd fathered me but never been a father. You destroyed this family the day you decided I wasn't worth loving. You destroyed it every time you chose Blake over me, every time you made me feel worthless, every time you pretended I didn't exist. I didn't do this. You did. But we're still family. Victoria appeared at Edward's shoulder, her makeup streaked with tears. Blood is thicker than water, Anna. We can forgive each other. We can move past this. Please. Please, don't send us to prison. Think of what this will do to the family name. The family name. Even now, that's what they cared about. Not me. Not what they'd done to me. Just their precious reputation. You taught me something important, I said, my voice steady. You taught me that blood doesn't make a family. Love does. Respect does. And you gave me neither. So no, we're not family. Not anymore. Blake pushed forward then, his face twisted with rage. You bitch. You vindictive, jealous bitch. I hope you choke on that money. I hope it ruins your life the way you've ruined ours. My life was already ruined, I said quietly. By you. By all of you. I'm just taking back what's mine. I turned away from them then, from the anger and desperation and hate. I didn't look back. James led me out a side door, down a service elevator, and out to a waiting car. As we pulled away from the courthouse, I watched the building recede in the distance, taking with it the old Anna, the invisible daughter, the forgotten granddaughter. She was gone. I was free. The legal aftermath took months to fully resolve. The criminal charges came swiftly. The state's attorney filed indictments against all three of them. Edward and Victoria were charged with forgery, fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. Blake faced similar charges, plus additional counts related to his misuse of estate funds. Gerald Hutchins, having cooperated, received probation. My family would not be so lucky. The trials were separate but equally devastating for them. Edward went first, and the jury took less than 3 hours to convict on all counts. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Victoria, whose involvement was somewhat less direct but still substantial, received 5 years. Blake got 6 years, plus additional time for the money laundering charges. Watching them sentenced was surreal. These people who'd once seemed so powerful, so untouchable, were led away in handcuffs. Edward didn't look at me. Victoria cried the whole time. Blake glared with impotent rage. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no sadness, just a profound sense of closure. The media coverage was extensive. Sarah Jenkins' articles for Chicago Magazine were nominated for a National Magazine Award. She documented the entire saga, from my childhood erasure to the courtroom victory, with nuance and empathy. Other outlets picked up the story. I was interviewed on Good Morning America, profiled in the New York Times, asked to speak at conferences about family abuse and inheritance rights. I hated the attention at first. I'd spent my whole life trying to be invisible by necessity. Being visible, being seen, was uncomfortable. But gradually, I learned to use it. I started speaking out about toxic families, about the long-term effects of emotional neglect, about how financial abuse is often invisible to outsiders. My story resonated with thousands of people who'd experienced similar treatment. I received letters, emails, messages from people thanking me for giving voice to their own pain. 6 months after the trial, I stood in what had been Grandpa Sampson's study. The mansion had been awarded to me as part of the estate. Along with everything else, I'd considered selling it. Too many bad memories. But this room, Grandpa's sanctuary, felt different. It felt like home. I'd kept everything exactly as he'd left it. The books, the desk, the old leather chair that still smelled faintly of pipe tobacco. I sat in that chair now, holding the letter he'd written me, reading his words again. You're stronger than you know. He'd been right. I was strong. Strong enough to fight. Strong enough to win. Strong enough to rebuild my life from the ashes of my family. I'd used part of the inheritance to establish the Samson Vance Foundation, focused on supporting young people from dysfunctional families, providing scholarships, therapy, legal assistance. I'd hired Marcus Alvarez as the foundation's investigator, helping people uncover family fraud and abuse. Dr. Chen joined as a consultant, offering pro bono forensic services. Even James Miller came out of retirement to serve on the board, mentoring young lawyers who took on family law cases. It was work that mattered. Work that honored Grandpa's memory better than any business empire could. I'd also reached out to others Grandpa had cared about, employees he'd treated well, charities he'd supported quietly. I learned about the real Samson Vance, not the ruthless businessman my father had described, but a complicated man who cared about fairness and dignity. I tried to live up to that legacy. The hardest part wasn't the legal battle or the public scrutiny, it was dealing with my own emotions. I'd spent so long being angry, being hurt, being focused on revenge, that I'd forgotten how to just be. Therapy helped, Dr. Patricia Wong, a psychologist specializing in family trauma, worked with me twice a week, helping me process the abuse, the neglect, the years of being made to feel worthless. You're grieving, she told me in one session. Not just for the family you lost, but for the family you never had. The parents who should have loved you. The childhood that should have been different. That's a profound loss, and you need to let yourself feel it. So I did. I let myself cry for the little girl who tried so hard to be good enough and never was. I let myself rage at the injustice of it all. And slowly, gradually, I let myself heal. I dated, cautiously. Opening up to people was hard when you'd learned early that vulnerability meant pain. But I tried. There was Michael, a teacher who was patient and kind. That lasted 6 months before we realized we wanted different things. Then Sophie, an artist who understood complicated families because she came from one too. That one ended amicably when she moved to Seattle for a gallery opportunity. I was learning that relationships could end without being traumatic, that people could care about you even if it didn't last forever. A year after the trial, Sarah Jenkins called me. I'm doing a follow-up piece. 1 year later, where are you now? Will you talk to me? We met at the same coffee shop in Andersonville where we'd first talked. I ordered the same drink. Some things felt important to repeat, to honor how far I'd come. How do you feel? Sarah asked, recorder between us once again. Do you regret any of it? I thought about that question seriously. Did I regret destroying my family? Did I regret the years of estrangement that would follow? Did I regret the pain I'd caused even to people who'd caused me so much pain first? No, I said finally. I don't regret fighting for what was mine. I don't regret standing up for myself. But I do grieve. I grieve the family I could have had if they'd chosen to love me. I grieve the relationship with my parents and brother that might have been possible if they'd been different people. That grief is real. But it doesn't mean I was wrong. Have they tried to contact you? My mother writes letters. From prison. They're not apologies. They're justifications. Explanations for why she did what she did. She still doesn't understand. She still thinks she was protecting her family, her social position. She still sees me as the villain. I paused. I don't read them anymore. My therapist suggested I stop. So they go straight into a drawer, unopened. Maybe someday I'll be ready, but not yet. And your brother? Blake sent one email, from a friend's account, before the prison restrictions kicked in. It was full of threats about what he'd do when he got out. I forwarded it to the state's attorney. I don't think he'll try again. Your father? Nothing. Complete silence. I think, in his mind, I ceased to exist the moment I filed that lawsuit. I became dead to him. Which is ironic since I was never really alive to him in the first place. Sarah nodded, making notes. What about the future? What do you want your life to look like 5 years from now? That question was easier. Happy. Surrounded by people who actually see me, who value me for who I am. I want to build something meaningful with the foundation. I want to help people who are going through what I went through, and I want to learn how to trust again, how to love without fear. That's going to take time, but I'm willing to do the work. The article came out 2 weeks later. The Invisible Heir, 1 year later, was Sarah's most read piece ever. It resonated because it wasn't just a story about winning a lawsuit or inheriting money. It was about a fundamental human need to be seen, to be valued, to matter. I received thousands of responses. People shared their own stories of family dysfunction, of being the scapegoat, of fighting for their right to exist. Some were heartbreaking. Some were inspiring. All of them reminded me that I wasn't alone, that my experience was both unique and universal. One letter stood out. It was from a woman named Claire, who'd been in a similar situation with her own family. She'd read my story and decided to fight back against the abuse she'd endured. "You gave me courage," she wrote. "You showed me that it's okay to choose yourself, even when everyone tells you you're selfish for doing so. Thank you for being brave first, so the rest of us could follow." I kept that letter. On hard days, when the grief felt overwhelming, when I wondered if I'd done the right thing, I'd read it, and I'd remember that standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. 2 years after the trial, I was invited to speak at a conference on family law and estate planning in Boston. The ballroom was full of lawyers, judges, and estate planners, people who dealt with family disputes every day. I stood at the podium, looking out at hundreds of faces, and felt that old familiar fear of being seen. But I pushed through it. "I'm not a lawyer," I began. "I'm not a legal expert or an estate planning professional. I'm just someone who learned, the hard way, that families aren't always what they seem, that love isn't guaranteed by blood, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is walk away." I told them my story, not the sanitized version from the news coverage, but the real, painful truth, the years of neglect, the casual cruelty, the way abuse can be hidden behind nice houses and charitable donations. I told them about finding the will, about the decision to fight, about what it cost me. People often ask if it was worth it, I said, if winning the lawsuit was worth losing my family, but that question misses the point. I didn't have a family to lose. I had people who shared my DNA, but didn't love me. Fighting back didn't destroy my family. It freed me from the illusion that I ever had one. The speech was well received. Afterward, several people approached me with their own stories, thanking me for my honesty. A young woman, maybe 25, waited until everyone else had left. "My family is like yours was," she said quietly. "I'm the forgotten daughter. My brother gets everything. I found out my grandmother left me money in her will, but my parents are contesting it. They're telling everyone I'm greedy, that I'm tearing the family apart. Everyone believes them because they're so respected in our community. I feel like I'm going crazy." I took her hands. "You're not crazy. You're not greedy. You're not wrong. And you're not alone. If you need help, resources, legal support, here's my foundation's information. We help people in exactly your situation." She started crying. I thought I was the only one. I thought something was wrong with me. "Nothing is wrong with you. Something is wrong with them. And you deserve better." Moments like that made everything worthwhile. Every painful memory, every hard day, every bit of grief I still carried, it was worth it if it meant helping someone else escape. 3 years after the trial, I was sitting in a new coffee shop, one that had opened in my neighborhood. I'd bought a brownstone in Lincoln Park, near James Miller's house. He'd become a kind of grandfather figure to me, the family I'd chosen rather than the one I'd been born into. We had dinner every Sunday, just talking, playing chess, being comfortable in each other's company. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Anna? The voice was familiar but distant. It took me a moment to place it. Aunt Margaret? My father's sister, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. She'd never been warm, but she'd also never been actively cruel. She'd simply been absent, like most of my extended family. Yes, I'm calling because I wanted to apologize. I should have called sooner. Years sooner. I knew what was happening. I saw how Edward and Victoria treated you. I saw how they favored Blake. And I said nothing. I did nothing. I've been thinking about that a lot since the trial. I read the articles. I heard what you said about invisible abuse. And I realized I was complicit. I made you invisible too by not speaking up. I was silent, not sure what to say. An apology, after all this time, felt strange. I know it doesn't fix anything, Margaret continued. I know it's too late to undo the damage, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry, and that I'm proud of you. Your grandfather would be proud too. You're more like him than Edward ever was. Thank you, I said finally. That means more than you know. We talked for a while longer. She told me about her life, her regrets. I told her about the foundation, about the work I was doing. It wasn't reconciliation exactly. Too much had happened for that. But it was something, an acknowledgement, a small piece of family that didn't hurt. When we hung up, I sat for a long time, thinking about forgiveness. I'd forgiven Aunt Margaret easily because her sins were passive, sins of omission rather than commission. But what about my parents? What about Blake? Could I ever forgive them? Doctor? Wong and I had talked about this many times. Forgiveness isn't about them, she'd said. It's about you. It's about releasing the anger so it doesn't poison your future. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean forgetting. It just means choosing not to carry the weight of their actions anymore. I wasn't there yet. Maybe I never would be. The anger had dulled into something more like sadness, a recognition that they were broken people who'd broken me too. But forgiveness felt like too much to ask. Maybe acceptance was enough. Accepting that they were who they were, that they'd done what they'd done, and that I'd survived anyway. 4 years after the trial, on the anniversary of Grandpa's death, I visited his grave. I'd been several times before, but this visit felt different. The grief wasn't as sharp. The anger wasn't as hot. I just missed him. I did it, Grandpa, I said, sitting on the grass beside his headstone. I fought like you asked me to. I didn't let them take what was mine, and I've tried to use it the way you would have wanted, to help people, to build something that matters. The wind rustled through the trees. A robin landed nearby, cocked its head, flew away. The world continued, indifferent to my pain and my triumph in equal measure. I wish you could see the foundation. I wish you could meet the people we've helped. I wish you could tell me if I'm doing this right. I paused. I miss you. You were the only one who saw me, the only one who made me feel like I mattered. I hope I'm making you proud. I stayed for a while longer, just sitting, just being. When I finally left, I felt lighter, not healed, not entirely, but better, moving forward. 5 years after the trial, I received news that my father had died in prison. A heart attack, sudden and fatal. Victoria called me, somehow, from prison. They'd given her special permission. Your father is dead, she said, her voice flat. I thought you should know. The funeral is next week. I'm allowed to attend under supervision. Blake will be there too, if he's granted leave. Will you come? I thought about it. The old Anna, the invisible daughter who craved approval, would have gone. Would have sat in the back and mourned the father who never was. But I wasn't her anymore. No, I said. I'm sorry for your loss, but I won't be there. He was your father. He was a man who happened to be my biological parent. That's not the same thing. She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat with my decision for a while, testing it for guilt or regret. I found none, just peace. I'd said my goodbye to Edward Vance years ago, in that courtroom. I didn't need to say it again at his funeral. Instead, I spent that day at the foundation, working with a young man whose stepfather had stolen his college fund. We reviewed his case, connected him with legal help, assured him he wasn't alone. That felt like better use of my time than mourning someone who'd never loved me. Now, 6 years later, I'm 34. My life looks nothing like I thought it would when I was the invisible daughter in the Vance mansion. I run the foundation full-time. We've helped hundreds of people navigate family abuse, financial fraud, inheritance disputes. We've funded dozens of scholarships. We've provided free legal services to people who couldn't afford to fight back on their own. I'm in a relationship with someone who sees me, really sees me. Her name is Rachel. She's a social worker, and she understands trauma and healing in ways that make me feel safe. We're taking it slow, but it's good, healthy, built on honesty and respect rather than obligation and fear. I've built a chosen family of people who value me. James Miller, still a constant presence in my life. Sarah Jenkins, who's become a close friend, Dr. Wong, who's helped me excavate and heal old wounds, Marcus Alvarez, whose cynical humor balances my intensity, the staff at the foundation, dedicated people who believe in the work we're doing. I still have hard days. Therapy has taught me that healing isn't linear. Some days I wake up and feel the weight of those lost years, the childhood I never got to have, the parents who never loved me. Those days are painful, but they're less frequent now. And I've learned to sit with the pain rather than run from it, to acknowledge it without letting it consume me. Victoria was released from prison last year. She tried to contact me once, through Aunt Margaret. The message was simple. She wanted to meet, to talk, to explain. I declined. Maybe someday I'll be ready for that conversation. But not yet. Maybe never. And that's okay. Blake still has 2 years left on his sentence. I don't think about him much anymore. The hatred that defined him, that drove him to participate in the fraud, seems like someone else's problem now. He's not part of my life. He chose not to be, and I've accepted that choice. Last month, I gave the keynote speech at a conference for family court judges. I talked about invisible abuse, about the ways families can destroy their children while maintaining a perfect facade. I talked about the importance of believing victims, of looking beyond surface appearances, of understanding that abuse comes in many forms. After the speech, a judge approached me, an older woman with kind eyes. "Thank you," she said. "I've been on the bench for 20 years, and I've seen too many cases where I suspected something was wrong but couldn't prove it. Your story will change how I evaluate family disputes. It will help me see what's hidden. That's my purpose now. To make the invisible visible, to give voice to the people who've been silenced, to ensure that others don't have to fight as hard as I did to be seen." Sometimes people ask if I regret any of it, if I wish I'd tried harder to maintain the relationship with my family, if I think I was too harsh, too unforgiving. The answer is always no. I did what I had to do to survive. I fought for what was mine, not just the money, but my dignity, my sense of self, my right to exist as a full human being rather than a shadow in someone else's story. Grandpa Sampson used to say that strength isn't about never falling down, it's about getting back up. I fell down many times. I was pushed down, knocked down, held down, but I got back up. Every time. And that's what matters. I keep his letter in my desk drawer at the foundation. On days when the work feels overwhelming, when I wonder if any of this makes a difference, I take it out and read his words. "You're stronger than you know. He believed in me when no one else did. He saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. I try to be that person for others now, the one who sees, the one who believes, the one who says, 'You're not crazy, you're not wrong, you deserve better.' Because everyone deserves to be seen, everyone deserves to matter. And sometimes, all it takes is one person believing in you to change everything. My story doesn't have a neat ending. Life isn't a movie where everything resolves perfectly. I still struggle with trust. I still have moments of doubt. I still carry scars from those years of being invisible. But I also have joy. I have purpose. I have love. I have a life that's mine, built on my own terms, free from the people who tried to erase me. I'm no longer invisible. I'm Anna Vance. I'm a survivor. I'm a fighter. I'm someone who refused to accept that she didn't matter. And that makes all the difference. The other day, I received a letter from a teenager in Nebraska. Her family situation mirrored mine. She felt alone, worthless, invisible. She'd read about my case and wanted to know if it gets better. I wrote back immediately. "Yes," I told her. "It gets better. Not easily, not quickly. But if you hold on, if you fight for yourself, if you refuse to accept their version of who you are, it gets better. You are seen. You are valued. You matter. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise." I mailed the letter and imagined it arriving at her home, imagined her reading those words and feeling, maybe for the first time, that someone understood, that she wasn't alone, that there was hope. That's my legacy now. Not the money Grandpa left me, not the victory in court. But the lives touched, the people helped, the invisible made visible. It's not the legacy I expected, but it's the one that matters. And somewhere, I think Grandpa Sampson is smiling.